Welcome to the Period Besties podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Welcome to the Period Besties podcast. Today, Katie and I are going to give you just a very brief overview of the cycle. For those of you who don't know, we'll get into more of the goodies as we break down the different phases. But today we just thought we'd take a nice cruise through the cycle, what the hormones are ideally doing in the different phases, and even just the terms, right? So out of the gate, Western medicine considers the menstrual cycle to have two phases. The follicular phase, so day one when you get your period until you ovulate, and then the luteal phase when you ovulate until you get your next period. I personally think of the menstrual cycle as having 5 phases because to me, there's just 5 different hormonal shifts and you feel differently in each of those phases. So, menstrual, day 1, first day of your period. First full day of your period, usually. So sometimes when you're charting, we think of, if you get your period at like 7 at night, you might want to think of day 1 as the next day when you get that first full day of bleeding. But that can be a bit subjective. But that menstrual phase is usually what we consider day 1 of your cycle. So when you're charting, tracking things, you're going to think of day 1 as the first day you get your period. And the hormones have shifted, which is what causes you to get your period. So you want to dive into that a little bit, Katie?
Yeah, so you get your period, your progesterone, if you get your period, progesterone drops off. If you are pregnant, your progesterone will start to rise, right? So that's kind of like why we feel that like big dip on day 1. That's a huge change hormonally. And then your period could be anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And depending on how you're feeling, like you might start feeling energy start rising on day 3, maybe it's day 5. But generally a period is anywhere from like 3 to 7 days. And we really want to look for a cranberry red colored period, kind of the texture of like thick maple syrup, not too cloddy, not brown, different things like that. But that general things about that first phase of that cycle.
Yeah, there's of course going to be variations, but that's just the general parameters. Of course, there's that meme out there that says, who are the people that get a 2-day period? Are they God's favorites? I don't get people coming to me because they have a healthy, happy, easy 2-day long period, but I hear they exist. But yeah, in general, your hormones come to a nice flat level in the menstrual phase, and sometimes it feels a little bit more like the dam has burst and there's some release. And so if you have period issues, we'll talk about those obviously in future episodes. But by and large, your period should not be painful. I want to just hit this, and I'm going to hit this over and over and over again for however long we do this podcast. Normal is not common, right? Common is not normal. So even though period pain is common, it's not normal. So you're just not supposed to be painful, some light cramping, but it's not supposed to be painful. And it's not supposed to be, a gushing river either. It should be a pretty steady bleed. Sometimes day 2 can be heavier than day 1. That's within the realm of normal, but just to do that. So just to kind of clarify that a little bit. And then as we move into follicular, so this is where, like Katie was saying, you may feel your energy rising. Even if you're still bleeding, you may start to feel your energy rising. And this is now because your estrogen is starting to rise. You're going to have your luteinizing hormone, LH, as you may see it out in the world, is rising. Hormones are starting to rise, and it's giving you a bit of that more extroverted, more like get out there, a little bit more up feeling, a little bit more energy, a little bit more clarity, that kind of thing. So as you're moving into follicular, those rising hormones are also what's signaling to stop the menstrual phase. So those rising hormones are helping your body signal it's time to stop bleeding. So as one thing's, as the bleeding starts to lessen, those hormones are starting to rise. So those are kind of the body's signal for that.
Yep. And you'll notice your mood shifting, your brain. I always feel like my brain starts turning on a little bit more. Movement also, we'll dive into that later, but you'll probably feel like moving a little bit more too. And then as we head into ovulation, this is when estrogen is really like at its peak. This is when your libido might be the strongest. This is when you want to go jean shopping. This is just when you're going to feel like more sexy. I always feel like in my body during ovulation, and this is the shortest phase of your cycle. I wish it lasted longer because most people I know feel, not everybody, but most people feel kind of their best right at this phase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that follicle stimulating hormone, so FSH, you may just see the acronym out there in the wild, but that's stimulating all of these follicles in your ovaries to ripen eggs. And when you ovulate, there's just one winner. Usually, in the case of fraternal twins, there may be two winners, but usually there's just one winner. So those other follicles die. And when you ovulate, what's happening is that one egg is coming out of the ovary, and the space that's left actually turns into a new organ. And that organ is what is going to, in your luteal phase, produce your progesterone. So you need to ovulate to have progesterone. And when you go into that luteal phase, what's happening is after ovulation, your testosterone dips. So one of the reasons that we do have such a high libido in ovulation is because our testosterone spikes in that phase. Also, your confidence spikes along with your testosterone. So the day after ovulation, a lot of times people can feel depressed, sad, like what happened? I was so on top of the world yesterday, and now today I just don't feel as like juicy and vibrant and excited about life. I don't feel as confident. It's just that your estrogen and your testosterone have dipped. And the thing is that you might feel that little bit of a dip, but as your progesterone starts to rise, right? So that corpus luteum is what is developing in the ovary. It becomes the most highly vascularized organ in your body, which I just found mind-blowing and fascinating to me, which sometimes I think like people who feel a little bit more tired around and post-ovulation, it might be because of that organ formation. I don't know, but I think that might be a theory behind it. But anyway, I digress. So you're kind of coming down from that ovulation, and then that as the progesterone starts to get pumped out from that organ, it starts to rise. And that progesterone is what makes you feel nesting, calm, relaxed. Like it helps to counter effect that loss of testosterone. So often in the menstrual cycle, we say, don't worry about it. Next week will be different.
Yes. Yeah. And I think something, especially with tracking, if you're not feeling that calmness and if you feel more irritable and moody, that's when we really want to like dive in a little bit deeper and taking a closer look at what might be happening throughout your cycle, because the progesterone is there for us to feel calmer. And so many of us are experiencing lots of PMS, like mood swings and irritability and more anxiety and feeling low, where progesterone is supposed to like kind of like help us get through until we either have a period or we don't and we find out we're pregnant.
Yeah, that's where I coined the term deep luteal. It's those like 3 to 5 days before you get your period, where if you have PMS, which is not a phase of the menstrual cycle, it is a hormonal imbalance.
Yes.
rears its head. Now, I want you to know that you're not doing anything wrong. You're in good company. About 90% of people have some sort of PMS. So there's over 200 symptoms. We're not going to go into that today, but that's that deeper luteal phase, those couple of days right before your period, is where theoretically your estrogen and your progesterone are supposed to be coming down. Like, really, you should see more of a decrease of those hormones, which would be reflected in your basal body temperature those couple days before your period. And if you're one of those people that has a nice glide down, it should be kind of more of a smooth sailing. Some people have more of a drastic drop, so their like deep luteal might just be a day, and they have more of a drastic drop, and it might feel a little jarring. But if your progesterone and estrogen aren't in balance in your luteal and into that deep luteal phase, you'll see its effects in PMS symptoms.
Yeah. And I think everybody experiences it on different days, and each cycle is different as well. So that's just something I think tracking can be so helpful. And we'll definitely dive into what a basal body thermometer is and talking about that. But that's definitely been helpful, as you can kind of like see throughout your cycle, like what's actually happening with your unique hormones each month. And, like we've mentioned before, your period is your monthly report card. So what happened the 3 months previous can directly impact the period that you're actually having this month and what your cycle looks like too. So it's always fascinating when we really think about how we're working with our bodies and really bringing that mind piece into our body. I find to be helpful when I'm really working on my own period and when I'm working with my clients on their periods too.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So we'll dive into each phase and give you a bit more of an in-depth look of each phase in upcoming episodes. So stay tuned for that. But I hope today you got a little idea of what's going on hormone-wise in each of those phases of the cycle and why you might feel a little bit differently from day to day, week to week. And again, you'll feel better. It'll feel differently next week. So nothing's permanent in the menstrual cycle.
And I'll also say, like, welcome to the 5 phases.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next episode. A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bressack Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bressack, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebressack.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.